Riven had always been the giving type. Ever since he was a boy, his parents had drilled one lesson into him. Family comes first, even before yourself. So, he grew up believing that love could be measured in sacrifice. Every birthday, every celebration, every school event, he showed up for everyone but himself. As a teenager, he even paid more than half the rent at home, desperate for a simple thank you that never came. Deep down, he knew something was wrong, but the hunger for approval was stronger than reason. Now 28, Riven had finally started to find peace. For the first time in years, he had a stable job and enough savings to treat his family the way he'd always dreamed. When Thanksgiving approached, he went all out. Gifts for his parents, his sister Alara, her husband Joss, and their 3 kids. He bought extras too, just in case anyone unexpected showed up. He told himself this was what love looked like: effort, generosity, and joy. But joy turned to confusion the moment he arrived at his parents' house. He stood at the door with arms full of neatly wrapped gifts, expecting at least a smile. Instead, his mother opened the door with a blank expression. "Riven, maybe it's better if you don't join us this year," she said softly. At first, he thought it was a joke. He even laughed. But from inside, Alara's voice rang out sharp and clear. "This isn't a gathering for cheapskates. You've been such a drag lately." The words hit him like cold water. His father lingered awkwardly in the background, his mother avoided eye contact, and Alara looked satisfied, like she'd just won something. Riven stood frozen, his mind spinning between confusion, anger, and humiliation. "If that's how everyone feels," he muttered quietly, "then all right." He turned, walked back to his car, and sat in silence among the gifts he'd bought for the very people who'd just shut him out. As he stared at the colorful boxes beside him, he tried to make sense of it all. How could they call him a cheapskate? He'd helped Alara and Joss countless times, from paying their kids' school fees to pitching in for their house down payment. None of it made sense. He thought about their laughter, their dinners together, all the times he'd stepped up. Then he realized something bitter. Kindness had turned him into their wallet, not their brother. And right there in that moment, before we continue, please subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from so you don't miss out on our next story. His jaw clenched as he replayed Alara's smirk in his head. He'd done too much for her, and she'd turned that generosity into expectation. For the first time, anger outweighed guilt. He stepped out of the car, marched back to the house, and knocked again. His parents whispered nervously while Alara sprawled lazily on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Why am I suddenly unwelcome?" Riven demanded. Without even looking up, Alara said, "Because you've been slacking. Even the kids notice you don't give as much anymore." Riven blinked in disbelief. "Are you serious? I have hundreds of dollars worth of gifts sitting in my car right now." She shrugged. "A few years ago you gave way more. It's embarrassing now." He turned to his parents, searching for any sign of support. His mother sighed, offering a weak smile. "She's got a point, honey. You just got that new truck, didn't you? You had money for that." His voice cracked with disbelief. "It's financed. And even if it wasn't, how does buying myself something make me a bad brother?" Alara leaned back, crossing her legs. "You make twice what Joss does," she said coolly. "We're family, family helps each other." Riven looked at her, then at Joss, who sat quietly avoiding his eyes. "So, because I've helped before, I'm now obligated to do it forever? And if I stop, I'm suddenly cheap?" Alara smirked. "If that's how you see it." That was his breaking point. His voice dropped, steady but final. "Then I guess I don't belong here." And with that, he walked out, leaving behind both his gifts and a part of himself he'd never get back. The drive home felt endless. Riven's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Every mile between him and his parents' house made the ache in his chest heavier. How could they turn on him like that? He had done everything right, worked hard, stayed loyal, helped when no one else could. But now, he was nothing more than a drag. By the time he parked in front of his apartment, he felt hollow. He stared at the wrapped gifts in the back seat, and for the first time, they made him sick to look at. He sat in silence for nearly an hour. The street was quiet, the only sound being the hum of the car engine cooling down. He kept asking himself where things had gone wrong. Maybe it wasn't just tonight. Maybe it had been building up for years. Alara had always needed him, from her college loans to her children's birthday parties. Every time she said, "You're the only one I can count on," he believed it was love. But now he understood it had only been dependence disguised as affection. He leaned back, eyes stinging with unshed tears. "I created this," he admitted to himself. He had made it too easy for her to use him. Every time she cried, he fixed things. Every time she failed, he picked her up. But now, standing up for himself made him the villain. That realization hurt more than their rejection. Still, something inside him shifted, a cold calm that replaced the guilt he'd carried for years. He whispered to the empty car, "No more." Riven spent the next few weeks cutting all communication. No calls, no texts, no visits. He needed space to breathe. To his surprise, no one reached out either. Christmas came and went. New Year's arrived with fireworks outside his window, but his phone stayed silent. It was the loneliest holiday season he'd ever had, yet strangely, it felt peaceful. He didn't have to pretend anymore. Still, loneliness has a way of whispering doubts. There were nights when he almost picked up the phone, almost typed a message to Alara. But every time, he remembered the smug tone in her voice, calling him cheap. He'd given so much, and somehow it was never enough. That night replayed in his head over and over until the shame faded into something else, resolve. One chilly evening in January, Riven's phone buzzed unexpectedly. It was a message from Joss. "I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. I don't agree with what happened. Emma won't listen, but I thought you should know." Riven stared at the message for a long time. Joss, quiet, timid Joss, was finally reaching out. But the apology felt late. After a while, he typed back, "Thanks, Joss. But some things can't be brushed off that easily." Joss didn't reply, and Riven didn't expect him to. By February, life started to feel normal again. Riven buried himself in work, gym sessions, and quiet evenings at home. But one Friday night, loud knocking shook his apartment door. When he opened it, Alara stood there, hair messy, face flushed with irritation. "We need to talk," she said, barging in before he could speak. Riven crossed his arms, sighing. "About what?"
She didn't waste time.
"You need to stop this childish act and start helping out again." Her voice was sharp, her tone commanding. Riven blinked. "Helping out? You mean paying your bills?" She glared. "You know exactly what I mean. The kids barely have what they need. Joe's struggling. You've made things so hard for us." He laughed bitterly. "I didn't make things hard for you, Alara. You did that yourself." "You've always helped before," she snapped, stepping closer. "Why are you being stingy now?" He stared at her in disbelief. "Stingy? You lied to Mom and Dad about me. You turned them against me, and now you show up demanding money?" His voice dropped coldly. "You're a grown woman with a husband and 3 kids. Figure it out. I'm not your lifeline anymore." She glared, jaw tight, before spinning on her heel and storming out. As the door slammed shut, Riven whispered to himself, "That's the last time I let her in." For a moment after Alara left, the apartment felt too quiet, almost eerie. Riven stood by the door, staring at the spot she'd just occupied. He half expected her to knock again, to come storming back in for another round of accusations. But the silence lingered. He exhaled slowly and walked toward his window, watching the city lights blur through the glass. A strange sense of peace crept in. For the first time in his adult life, he had said no, and meant it. 2 days later, that brief calm shattered. His phone rang with an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Normally, he ignored unknown calls, but something in his gut told him to answer. "Hello," he said. "Is this Mr. Riven Elson?" A professional voice asked. "Yes," he replied cautiously. "This is Patricia Wills. I'm an attorney. I represent a client who has concerns about financial matters involving your family. Do you have a moment to talk?" Riven's stomach tightened. "An attorney? What financial matters?" he asked. Patricia's tone stayed calm. I can't go into full detail over the phone, but it relates to money you've provided your sister, Alara, over the past few years, and how those funds have been used. His pulse quickened. Who's your client? He demanded. There was a short pause before she said gently, I'm afraid I can't reveal that yet. But please know, you're not being sued. This is only a discussion. He hesitated but finally agreed to meet the next day. His mind spun through 1,000 possibilities. Had Alara taken out a loan in his name? Was this some elaborate trick to guilt him again? By the time he arrived at the law office, his nerves were raw. Patricia greeted him with a professional smile and handed him a folder. Mr. Elson, my client is your brother-in-law, Joss. Riven blinked. Joss, he repeated. Why would Joss need a lawyer? Patricia leaned forward, her eyes steady. Because he discovered something disturbing. He believes Alara has been misusing the money you've given her. She's been hiding funds from both of you. Riven's throat tightened. Hiding money? What do you mean? Patricia opened the folder and revealed printed bank statements, receipts, and screenshots. According to Joss, Alara has been diverting your contributions into a separate account in her name. Riven leaned closer, his pulse thudding in his ears. The statements showed transfers matching the times he'd helped with bills or emergencies, and soon after, withdrawals from that same account for spa retreats, boutique purchases, and even a weekend getaway with someone named Jenna. He frowned. Are you saying none of that money went to the kids? Patricia nodded. I'm afraid that's correct. Joss only found out recently. Riven sat back in disbelief, running his hands over his face. So all those times I helped, thinking I was saving her family, she was just spoiling herself? Patricia's voice softened. It appears so. Joss said he suspected for a while, but he couldn't prove anything until he saw the account statements. Once he did, he came to me for legal advice. Riven shook his head slowly. Unbelievable. I was funding her vacations while she called me a cheapskate. He asked, Does Joss want me to do something about this? Press charges. Patricia shook her head. Not at the moment. He only wants to protect himself and his children. He felt you deserved to know the truth, especially if Alara tries to manipulate you again. Riven let out a humorless laugh. Too late. She already tried. Showed up at my place demanding I start helping again. Patricia nodded. That fits her pattern. She's likely panicking now that your financial support is gone. When Riven left the office that day, the folder still clutched in his hands. He felt something he hadn't in years. Clarity. The guilt, the confusion, the endless desire to fix things gone. Alara had used him. His kindness had been a currency, and she'd spent it recklessly. He wasn't her provider. He'd been her pawn. As he stood outside under the winter sky, Riven whispered to himself, Not anymore. Then he tucked the folder under his arm and walked away, determined to start living on his own terms, free from her shadow. That evening, Riven couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, the folder spread out in front of him like a collection of old scars. Each bank statement was proof of how far Alara had gone, not just in using his money, but in betraying his trust. He stared at the numbers, the transactions, and the familiar dates. He remembered every conversation where she had cried about rent or the kids' school fees. Every thank you that now felt hollow echoed in his mind. By morning, he decided to call Joss directly. The line rang a few times before Joss picked up, his voice quiet and uncertain. Riven. I didn't know she'd go this far, he said softly. I thought you deserved to know. Riven stayed silent for a moment before replying. Why now, Joss? Why come forward after all this? There was a long pause, then Joss sighed. Because the kids deserve better. And honestly, you do too. The words hit harder than Riven expected. For years, he had thought Joss was just complicit, too weak to speak up. But now, hearing him take a stand gave Riven a strange sense of hope. Whatever you're planning, Riven said carefully, you have my support. Just make sure those kids are safe. Joss hesitated before answering. I'm doing my best. I can't keep pretending everything's fine. They talked for nearly an hour about Alara's spending, about the kids, about what came next. Riven could hear exhaustion in Joss's voice, but also a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. When they finally hung up, Riven leaned back and exhaled. Maybe something good could come from all this. Maybe the cycle could finally end. Weeks passed in uneasy silence. Then one evening, Riven's phone buzzed again. A text from Joss. "We're leaving this weekend." Riven's heart skipped. He immediately called back. "What do you mean you're leaving?" Joss's voice came through the line, calm but firm. "I'm taking the kids to my parents' place out of state. I've packed the essentials. Alara doesn't know yet. She's away visiting a friend." Riven could hear the tremor in Joss's voice, a mix of fear and resolve. "You're sure this is what you want?" he asked. "It's what I have to do," Joss replied. "The kids see more than we think. They know when things are bad. I can't let them live in that kind of chaos anymore." Riven's chest tightened. "Do you need help?" Joss hesitated. "I was hoping you might, just until I get my first paycheck at the new job." "Say no more," Riven interrupted. "Just tell me what you need." For the first time in years, helping didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel like he was being used. It felt right, purposeful. He transferred money for their trip, helped arrange a moving truck, and even sent food supplies to their new address. It was the same act of giving, but this time it was for freedom, not obligation. A few days later, Alara found out. She called Riven in a rage that made the phone shake in his hand. "You turned him against me," she screamed. "You destroyed my family." Riven waited for her to stop yelling before replying, his tone calm and measured.
No, Alara.
"You destroyed it yourself. Maybe if you spent less time shopping and more time being a wife and mother, things would have turned out differently." She cursed at him, her words sharp and venomous, but he didn't flinch. "Good luck with that," he said finally and hung up. Days turned into weeks, and the storm slowly quieted. Riven received updates from Joss occasionally, the kids adjusting to their new school, him settling into a steady job, everyone finally starting to smile again. For once, there were no requests for money, no emotional blackmail, no guilt trips, just gratitude. Riven felt lighter with every message. He realized he had been carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes for too long, and now, he was free. By the start of spring, Riven's life felt unrecognizable. There were no tense family calls, no messages asking for money, and no emotional guilt hanging over his head. His evenings were quiet now, sometimes lonely, but peaceful. He began reconnecting with friends he'd lost touch with over the years, and even started volunteering at a youth center. For the first time, his kindness wasn't being taken for granted. It was being appreciated. One Sunday afternoon, his parents called unexpectedly. He let the phone ring twice before answering, unsure what tone to expect. His mother's voice trembled as she spoke. "Riven, we heard everything about Alara, about what she did. We're so sorry, son. We should have listened." His father chimed in quietly. "We were wrong to take her side." Riven closed his eyes, the years of hurt echoing faintly in the silence between their words. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't need to apologize anymore. I just want peace." They talked for nearly an hour. Awkward at first, but slowly genuine. His mother cried at one point, saying she didn't realize how much pressure they had put on him. Riven didn't hold it against her. He had carried that burden long enough, and it was time to let it go. "I still love you both," he said gently, "but I can't keep living for anyone else. I need to start living for me." His father cleared his throat and said quietly, "You've always had a good heart, son. Don't let this change that." After the call, Riven sat in silence, watching the sunset spill golden light across his living room. It felt like the first sunset he'd really seen in years. He thought about Alara, where she might be, what she might be doing. Word from distant relatives said she was still blaming everyone but herself, floating from one borrowed couch to another, chasing sympathy instead of change. Riven didn't feel anger anymore, just pity. Some people, he realized, never grow until life forces them to. One evening, Joss sent him a photo of the kids standing in front of their new school, smiling, backpacks slung over their shoulders. The caption simply read, "They're doing great. Thank you, Riven." He stared at the image for a long time, feeling something warm settle in his chest. This was the kind of help that mattered, Not handouts that fed entitlement, but support that helped someone stand on their own feet. As months passed, Riven began writing again, something he hadn't done since his teenage years. Late nights with a cup of coffee turned into pages filled with stories about boundaries, family, and the courage to walk away. It wasn't about revenge anymore.
It was about healing.
He wrote not to remember the pain, but to remind himself of how far he had come from it. Sometimes the memories still surfaced, the sting of that Thanksgiving rejection, the anger of being called a cheapskate, the endless guilt of never being enough. But those memories no longer hurt him. They reminded him of lessons learned the hard way. Generosity without limits becomes a trap, and love without respect becomes a burden. He smiled to himself one night and murmured, "Maybe I had to lose them to find myself." A year later, during another Thanksgiving, Riven cooked for himself for the first time. The table was simple: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and a small pie he'd bought from a bakery down the street. As he sat alone, he didn't feel lonely. He felt whole. His phone buzzed with messages from Joss and the kids, photos of them laughing around their dinner table. For once, family didn't feel like a chain. It felt like choice, something earned, not owed. Riven leaned back, smiling at the flicker of candlelight on the table. He realized he hadn't ruined anyone's life. He'd just stopped letting them ruin his. Freedom had cost him a family dinner, but it gave him back his self-worth. And as the night grew quiet, he whispered to himself, sometimes peace isn't about making everyone happy. It's about learning when to stop trying. Then he raised his glass softly to the empty room and said, "To peace, finally."